Welcome to Sex Ed with DB. I'm your host, DB. Let's get into it. Don't fast forward this. I'm going to tell you all about a smut quiz that we made. Are you having trouble getting in the mood? That's normal. Most of us don't start turned on. We get turned on by something, and that's called responsive desire. You just need a little spark to get you going. So me and my team made the smut quiz. You answer 5 quick questions, and we match you with your assigned smut. One single high heat scene from a book picked specifically for what turns you on. Not a whole novel, no slow burn. We drop you right into the good part. Read it in under 2 minutes and let your brain and body catch up. Go take the smut quiz now and get your required smut reading. Links in the show notes or at sexedwithdb.com.
Hi, I'm Jamie.
And I'm Rachel.
And we're in debt.
We are in debt.
Because
we're deadbeats.
Losers.
We care more about dancing than making money.
Actually, we've struggled with money because
most people do.
I never thought anybody was in credit card debt like me.
And that's what this podcast is all about.
The first season of Debtheads explores the insidious political and economic policies.
Do you know what your interest rate is?
No. As well as the seismic but elusive cultural shift.
You know, I'll buy like a tote bag and go, why the hell do I need another tote bag?
That have defined America over the last 4 decades.
Just being alive is expensive. I'm getting priced out of living in America.
Deadheads will make you laugh till you cry.
Or cry until you laugh.
And it's out now wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's talk about solo sex. Masturbation can help reduce stress, improve sleep, and help you figure out what actually feels good for you. One of my go-tos when I'm having me time is Uber Lube. It's super smooth, it lasts a long time, and it helps every touch feel better, truly. It's also latex compatible, so it's great with condoms, and it even helps reduce chafing for workouts or thigh rub season. Also, here's a very fun fact. Stylists use it as a hair serum flyaway tamer. Pretty cool. Uber Lube is a real multitasker. If you're curious and haven't tried it, you should try it for yourself. Use code SEXEDWITHDB for 10% off at uberlube.com and see why Uber Lube is my all-time fave. Hello, and welcome back to Sex Ed with DB. I'm DB, your favorite sex educator and pleasure expert, and today we have a real treat for you. I got to sit down with Dr. Justin Garcia, Executive Director of the Kinsey Institute and author of a new book, The Intimate Animal, The Science of Sex, Fidelity, and Why We Live and Die for Love. I love the drama. In this conversation, we talk about a ton of stuff. We talk about how vital intimacy is to human survival. If that sounds like a stretch, Dr. Garcia's research says it's not a stretch at all. At the end of the day, humans are just animals, social animals that have evolved to need each other. There's been a lot of discussion about an intimacy crisis and loneliness in the news, and studies have shown that loneliness is rising across the board. What can we do to bring intimacy back into our lives? What does this say about our moment in time right now as a species? And in case those questions are making you think of the so-called male loneliness epidemic, you're going to love our The Buzz segment later on in the interview. And after that, don't forget our pleasure practice of the week at the very end of the episode. This week, we'll be taking one step to increase the intimacy in our lives. Because as you'll hear from Dr. Justin Garcia, intimacy is critical for feeling alive and connected to other people. The episode you're about to hear has been edited for time, but Dr. Garcia is so brilliant, we just have to offer the conversation in full. If you want more deep, insightful, brilliant academic knowledge from Dr. Garcia, we'll be putting a full version on the paid tier of our newsletter, The Sleepover. As always, you can find it in the show notes. Now, let's figure out why humans absolutely need intimacy with Dr. Garcia. Dr. Justin Garcia, welcome to Sex Ed with DB. How's it going today?
I am great. I'm thrilled to be here with you. We have so much to talk about.
Oh, we have so much to talk about. And before we started recording, we both complimented each other's energies. I feel like we have a similar kind of fun-loving personality, which is always very fun to have someone like that on the podcast, especially when they're a brilliant researcher and scientist. So I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm
Thank
thrilled.
you. Of course. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to talk about your new book, which is The Intimate Animal, The Science of Sex, Fidelity, and Why We Live and Die for Love. Very dramatic. I love it. I love the subtext.
Drama's good, you know.
You need it. We need it. And I can't wait to talk about why intimacy is vital for survival and everything there. So great. We're going to dive right in with our first segment called The Quick and Dirty, which is our rapid fire segment where we get to know our expert with bold questions, honest answers, and in this case, just a little bit of spice, because again, we love the drama, we love the spice. And I'm going to give you a challenge here, which I'm sure that you will be able to do. I'd love to hear about your elevator pitch for your new book in one sentence. Can you do it?
Yeah, in one sentence. Oh, this is tough. I'm a professor. I can't say anything in one sentence. Okay. So at the core of it, the book is understanding the tensions between social monogamy, our tendency for deep connections with another, and sexual monogamy, which is our tendency, or sometimes lack thereof, of fidelity.
Oh, that's good. I know that there were some kind of M dashes, there were some commas, there were some parentheses. You really completed the challenge like a good student and a good professor. So good job. Fantastic. So interesting to hear more about that. I want to hear, what was the number one most surprising thing that you found during your researching for this book?
Oh God, this is hard for me because there were really a lot of things. I was fortunately in a place that I understood a lot about the literature, and being at the Kinsey Institute, you're sort of surrounded by experts on different areas of sex, relationships, reproduction. I think what was so startling to me was when I really started to peel back more of the literature, that our understanding of intimacy and romantic connections was really separate from so much of what we work on about sexual behavior, that there are different academic literatures, there are different societies people present at, and we often don't think about, particularly as evolutionists, as an evolutionary biologist, where they interconnect and how profound that interconnection is.
Okay. I know this is the quick and dirty, but I'm going to ask you a little bit more. Tell me a little bit more about the interconnectedness. Like, what does that look like?
Sure. So so my own research interests were a lot on thinking about the intersections of love and sex, or the relationship context of our sexual lives. That doesn't necessarily mean we're prioritizing relationships, but the relationship context could mean no one. It's solo behavior. It could be a casual hookup encounter. It could be transactional with a sex worker. It could be a long-term romantic relationship. It could be multiple relationships. I've always been a little bit agnostic to what the relationship structures are, but I'm interested in how those relationship dynamics influence the expression of sex and sexuality. But there really are separate worlds. There's people who study relationships, and there's people who study sex, and there's a handful of us that go back and forth. And so what that means is that all the conclusions and the theories and the research were really living in different pockets. And I still to this day find it shocking that that's the case.
Wow, that's fascinating. Don't worry, we're going to get into that in a little bit. We just have a few more quick and dirty questions that I'm so curious about. What is one thing that you found in your research that felt like it always should have been obvious, based on kind of common sense, or things that, sometimes you feel like you need to prove something that kind of feels like everyone knows that it's true, but in order to have the scientific paper, then you're like, aha, finally, I can show that this is true.
Well, one is a story that I start The Intimate Animal with, a sort of opening story that I asked. We went to a legal brothel and had a tour, and we were talking to people there. And what was the most expensive thing that someone could get at a legal brothel? What, for all of your sexual fantasies, what could you spend your most amount of money on if you had it and wanted to? And it was intimacy. It was the girlfriend experience. It was couching whatever you were about to do sexually, couching it in the context of some relationship dynamic. So you have a bottle of wine, you do this sort of date interaction, and then maybe you do something sexual. Not always, but typically you would do something sexual. But really, where people were willing to put the most amount of money and resources was couching a transactional sexual encounter and acting like it's a relationship dynamic. Our deep, deep desire for thinking about how intimacy and connection shape so much about our sexual expression.
Oh, have you seen the film Rental Family with?
No.
Oh my gosh, you're going to go wild. So Rental Family is this new film. It's like a Japanese American film with Brendan Fraser. And he plays an actor who acts as these certain roles in people's lives, intimate roles. So he acts as a young girl's dad to help her get into this private school. He acts as a boyfriend. He acts as, all of these different roles that he has, which really it gets at exactly what you're talking about. The fact that intimacy and playing this part in somebody else's life can, in this case, be the most expensive, or in the case of the film, no spoilers, but just it's very meaningful to play a certain role. There was also a role that his boss was playing. His boss was playing a fake boss for somebody else who was ridiculing him for committing fraud. And so this person wanted to be ridiculed in this way that was fake, but because in real life, especially because of the structures, the social structures, et cetera, that exist in Japan, he wasn't able to go to his real boss and say this. So it's just, I highly recommend this film. First of all, it's very sweet. It's incredible. Brendan Fraser does an insane job. And it just kind of proves this idea that intimacy is kind of the most important thing that we as people can access between other people.
Mm-hmm. And as a sexologist, I think we think about the intense things people do for sex in their lives, but people do in some ways more intense things for love. People really do live and die for love bonds in their life. They tend to not do that on average for sex. We do silly things. We do high risk taking things for sex. We tend to not kill and die for sex, but we do for love.
Wow. Okay, our last quick and dirty question. We're taking a full left turn here because of your evolutionary biologist background. What is your favorite wildlife mating ritual?
Oh, gosh. There's so many. My favorite? I have to pick one? Oh, come on. So one of my favorite rituals, and I write about it in the book, actually, I mention it, is the weedy sea dragon. And they can be found off the coast of Australia. And what I love is they do a mirror dance. So when they are mating, when they're in their courtship mode, one tries to copy the behavior of the other. It's called a mirror dance. And they will do this for hours and hours and hours. Eventually, then, the behavioral synchrony will lead to the dropping of eggs and then fertilizing those eggs. And they're pipefish. They're related to seahorses. So, which they have their own interesting mating patterns in terms of males are sometimes pregnant in certain pipefish. But this mirror dance, everyone should look it up. It's just, there's something so elegant and beautiful about it. And it makes me think about human dancing. And in fact, there are some studies about how dancing and behavioral synchrony can be associated with things we're looking for in courtship and can be deeply attractive, as any of us who have been on a dance floor with someone suddenly realizing we like them more than we thought.
I love it. We're definitely going to look this up and post about it on our socials. So stay tuned, beautiful listeners. But this is making me think of the, in improv class when two people are kind of tasked with doing the same exact thing. I feel like it's more silly in humans than it must be for, what is it? Weedy sea dragons? What are they called?
Weedy sea dragons. Yeah.
I'm so curious to hear about that. Okay, so you made it through the quick and dirty. We're on to the core of our interview here, and we're going to talk about intimacy. So let's get started. So your thesis here, if we're going to boil it down a little bit in the book, is that intimacy is fundamental to human survival. And I'd love to dive into that a little bit. Tell me, what does this mean? How does your research support this idea? How did you kind of come to this conclusion?
I was working with a psychologist who's now a dear friend of mine, a collaborator of mine, Anne Merriweather, and a developmental psychologist. And she was starting to get interested in this concept of hookup culture, hookup behavior. And there was something about, how did I reconcile this theoretical question about humans form intense pair bonds? Anthropologists had argued that most sexual activity occurs in the context of long-term pair bonds. Almost all reproduction around the globe occurs in context of pair bond relationships. So there were these sort of human biology, anthropology questions. But how do you reconcile that with, we were on a college campus and every Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, people were going out, they were hooking up, movies were starting to come out about hookups, academic papers were coming out. So for me, it was really a theoretical question of how do you reconcile this anthropological literature with what's happening like sociologically in the real world right now? So we started doing a series of studies looking at when people had seemingly casual sex encounters, was there some role of intimacy there? And what we did in a series, study after study, we found in one, for instance, 51% of college students were engaging in a casual hookup because they had hoped that it would turn into a romantic relationship. And we found that, over 60% in another study would spend the night and cuddle. And now maybe, okay, that doesn't sound too surprising, but it should sound surprising if we really are understanding these as uncommitted encounters. And as a biologist, sleeping next to an individual, spending the night and cuddling, that is a remarkable act of vulnerability for a species to do. And we take that for granted, especially if you're on a college campus or if you're young. So for me, there were all these questions about connection and intimacy, even in the seemingly uncommitted encounters. That's how I got started. I demanded to understand how to reconcile the real world with the literature. So I started asking all those sorts of questions. And there's not a species on this planet that family and kin are as involved in our mating and sexual lives as in humans. And so that's how I sort of stumbled in to thinking about
casual questions.
Yeah. And then I had a family member who was quite sick, who had brain cancer. And I was watching how my cousin Jen and her husband Dave, how they were navigating their marriage and their relationship through illness. And they were quite young when Jen got sick. And that really had a deeply personal impact on me. It really made me think how, what does that vow in sickness and health mean? Why do we take it? How does it play out in real time? And as a biologist, is that really what other species would do? Do they stay with a partner they're mating with through sickness, through those challenges? So the fact that we can love so intensely, that we stay through really difficult things, that's what kind of got me really, really focused on those series of questions. And I've been asking different parts of them ever since.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. It's so, beautiful is like the first word that comes into my mind. I think that like the way that if you're listening and you've ever been in love, if you've ever felt passion, if you've ever felt like connection and intimacy, there's nothing like it. I think that that's what's really interesting to me about this work is like whatever you want to call it, right? Like chemistry, connection, intimacy. It makes you feel like you're part of someone else or part of something else. Talk to me a little bit more about this idea though, that it's fundamental to human survival. Like where in your research, like where in the book do you talk about this? What does it mean to need this in a very real way?
Yeah. So one of the arguments for humans is that we having been engaged in pair bonding behavior for a little over 4 million years, that our ancestors, that we have this capacity, but a lot of it for humans also has to do with these long-term investments, forming long-term pair bonds. And there's so much about our mating behavior that requires unpacking, that if we were just a species that engaged in a mating event, led to pregnancy, and we went off and raised them, like many species do, there's so much that we do that doesn't make sense. Even the capacity we take for granted in human females that women can have sex across the ovulatory cycle. There's a lot of species that they can't. So part of it is all of that. There's lots of little pieces of evidence that come together to tell a story of, well, sex is serving a bonding purpose. It's not just reproductive, because sex is costly. So the reason that some species can't have sex when the females are not in estrus is because there's a cost to it. Why would you do it if it couldn't lead to reproduction? So for us, that suggests that sex has these other social benefits, that we are taking long amounts of time. That suggests that you're with one partner and you're attempting mating behavior with them over months and months and months that lead to pregnancy. That we take so long to raise our offspring. So that tells the reproductive story. That didn't get to your core question though, right? But that tells the reproductive.
That's the background.
But that's the classic evolutionary thinking of why pair bonds evolved in any species, but particularly humans. But for us, there's so much of our lives that are embedded in these social relational dynamics that I started to think more and more that we're focusing just on the sexual reproduction piece. And we're not focusing enough on really taking the power of those connections as being evolved and adaptive, that there was selective pressure to form bonds that allow us to stay with someone through to weather storms. So if the purpose of these bonds are to weather uncertainty, you need them to be strong enough to weather challenges of uncertainty, what comes with it.
So really, first of all, thank you for that background. You're so fascinating to listen to. I understand why you're such a successful professor and author. I'm getting the firsthand account here, so thank you. So it's really kind of about this desire to connect, especially when things inevitably for humans get tough. And when, like you said, people get health issues, when, financial stress, the economy, like all of these, we're living it right now, like a very stressful time, right? So like this idea of intimacy and connection, being able to support people through those hard times, that makes a ton of sense to me. Moving on to kind of the social aspect of this, right? And thinking through, like, for example, we last season had Dr. Lex Brown James on the podcast. She's an amazing sex therapist and just this incredible researcher and educator. And she talks about pleasure being a fundamental right, being a birthright, really. And I'm wondering what you think about that with intimacy. And if they are rights, how do we ensure our access to them is protected, especially right now? This is kind of like a zoom out question.
Yeah, it's a big question. And it's one that's, I think on the one hand, it's a philosophical one, but it's also a deeply biological one. How do we understand who we are and what we need? We are a social animal. We are a social primate. We require connection. We require physical touch. And when I say require, I don't mean just in terms of our mental health. There's more and more evidence that it's important for our homeostasis and physiological function. And my colleague Sue Carter is the world's leading expert on the behavioral effects of oxytocin, the so-called cuddle hormone. There's increasing evidence that oxytocin, which is so involved in the physiology of bonding. We talk a lot about mother-child bonds and oxytocin, but also romantic partners. Oxytocin really regulates the immune system. So there have been studies that people with higher levels of oxytocin, experimental studies where they give you a cut on your hand, and higher levels of oxytocin, they have faster wound healing. So this idea that love is the best medicine, right? This is the physiology of love is the best medicine, that you have close connections, that our social relationships become embodied. They impact how our physiology works. Are we synchronizing to other people, whether it's on a dance floor or we're mating? Are we, how our immune systems are upregulated and working? There's so much that we really need to understand, that we are a social primate. And to your point about, is it, I think it's fundamental if we want to think about human psychological and physical health, both. We need to appreciate that, which is why people don't do well in isolation. Some people like being alone, but we know that for the most part, people desire, sometimes psychologists call it the need to belong. You want to feel like you belong to something, some social fabric. You need to feel connected to people. And we desire that in all sorts of ways. So I think it's important that we recognize that and that we cultivate it and we celebrate it. I mean, there's all this talk about the so-called loneliness epidemic. How are we so lonely when we're more connected than ever before in our species history? It's because the quality of those connections, the depth of those social connections are not what we crave and frankly what we need. So I like the idea of thinking of it as a birthright.
100%. We're definitely going to get into the loneliness epidemic a little later, so stay tuned for that so we can hear Justin's expert insights. Let me tell you about the most fun homework assignment I have ever given, Daily Magic Wand Time. It started with me doing a 21-day experiment to answer one question. What happens to stress, sleep, mood, and sexual satisfaction when I use the magic wand every day versus when I have partnered sex versus when I have no sexual activity at all? The results were honestly so fascinating that we turned it into a full-blown scientific study with over 1,000 participants. Now we have real data on how consistent solo pleasure can impact mental health and overall wellness, not just orgasms. Curious? Go to magicwandstudy.com and read what we found. So you've had pleasurable sex. Yay! But then you get a yeast infection. It's painful, itchy, and a sign your vaginal microbiome could use some support. This is where Happy V comes in. Happy V creates scientifically sound products to support vaginal, gut, and immune health. Their prebiotic and probiotic is formulated with 7 clinically studied probiotic strains at clinically effective dosages, plus a patented prebiotic to help good bacteria thrive. If you want to support your vaginal health from the inside out, head to happyv.com. Use code SEXEDWITHDB for 15% off your first order or up to 30% off when you start a subscription. That's happyv.com. HappyV as in vagina.com. Roses wilt, chocolates vanish, but orgasms, they echo. This Valentine's, ditch the cliches and go for the Sona 3 Cruise from Lelo. It uses sonic waves to stimulate the entire clitoris, inside and out, because fun fact, the clit isn't just that little button. It's a whole network of pleasure tissue. Whether you're single, coupled, or somewhere in between, the best relationship you'll ever have starts with your own body. Head to lelo.com and use my stackable code SEXEDWITHDB for 15% off, because love may fade, but great orgasms are forever. I'd love to transition here to relationship structures. In our past few seasons, we're currently in season 13 of the podcast. We have over 320 episodes, a lot of content here. And we talk a lot about monogamy, ethical non-monogamy, polyamory, open relationships. And in your book, you talk about the open relationship question. When is it a good idea to open your relationship? When is it a bad one? So can you give us some insight on that?
My view isn't particularly a moral view one way or the other. And I think what I'm interested in is how people do structure their relationships in all these different ways. And understanding our natural history isn't a message of what should be or what could be. It helps us understand where tensions lie, where satisfaction lies, where challenges lie. It's a good thing about studying more, doing more research, I think, that we are never prisoners of our biology. We have this enormous opportunity. And we are flexible, we are adaptive. So the fact that human relationship structures adapt to different ecologies all around the world and in our evolutionary history is so exciting. That how we think about how we respond to an environment, how we respond to a population, available mates or partners or spouses in a particular area. And for a lot of biologists, we don't talk about monogamy in the way that it often gets talked about in sort of general, that you talk about, oh, is that couple monogamous? For biologists, we separate that into 2 different pieces. There's social monogamy, which is the pair bond. That's the relationship structure, an intense bond with another. And sexual monogamy, which is fidelity. And when we understand that there are 2 different things we're talking about, and that they have slightly different mechanisms in the brain for the social connection and the desire for sexual fidelity, or sexual variety, we could say, and then understand that both were under selection. We had selection for forming an intense pair bond, but we also had selection for variation, for the desire for novelty, that then we can kind of see how these interact in different ways. So for some people, you can be in a socially monogamous relationship and the craving for novelty, particularly sexual novelty, can lead to infidelity. For other people, it can lead to opening your relationship, to restructuring the relationship in ways that you can feel that social connection, but get your desires for sexual novelty. And then there's the other folks, I think, who feel that tension. They could do nothing and then they have suffer in their relationship because they just feel this tension, or they can take that desire for sexual novelty and pull it into their primary relationship. So if you want to be in a committed, socially monogamous relationship, you say, well, we need to do things with each other that give us a feelings of novelty, particularly sexual novelty, of excitement, to reinforce it in the context of our bond. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves pulled in another direction. So the more we understand, the more we can harness in our lives and our relationships.
Just to speak to this novelty, that is definitely something we cover a lot on the podcast, right? Of like figuring out, okay, maybe that could look like taking a rope bondage class and like figuring out what that looks like. Maybe it's, figuring out like where in a public bathroom you can go have sex with your partner, like something that feels exciting, that you feel like you are able to access something that's new that scratches that itch that you're aiming for.
Yeah, exactly. I remember we did our pandemic study and I interviewed this one couple who said she and her husband had started having shower sex during the pandemic. And she said it was really exciting and it was like funny and it was awkward. And she realized it wasn't as safe as she thought it was. And right. But partly it was because the kids were home from school. So it was out of necessity, but they found this new thing that added spice in their life in the midst of the horrors of the start of the pandemic. So you're right. And it could be a different room. It could be a different cologne. It could be a different lingerie. We also found in one study of what keeps passion alive in couples that just the intentionality, just the mood setting, music, lights, candles, wasn't about the smell of a particular candle. It was about showing the effort of trying to focus in on prioritizing in sex with your partnership. So, and connection. So on the questions of non-monogamy, the challenge for answering this question of how do you do it or what's the way to do it, they all come with different pressure points. They all come with different questions and challenges. Every relationship structure has its pressure points. But when we think about relationships that are non-monogamous in this way, there's something very different from polyamory, plural love, and a sexually open relationship that has let's say a don't ask, don't tell policy. Just use protection, use condoms when you're traveling. Or a couple that engages in threesomes and they're present for the behavior with a third partner. One of the big things is how you can negotiate jealousy, how your feelings of compersion. Do you find joy knowing your partner gets pleasure with someone else? And I think when we think about, should I open a relationship? Am I the right person for it? In some ways, it's the same question, am I the right person for a long-term socially monogamous relationship? So I think the answer there, and maybe this is a boring answer, is that it's, I think the right one is it takes a lot of negotiation. It takes a lot of figuring out what are the borders of your comfort in a relationship and how do you manage communication, interpersonal communication? How do you manage jealousy? And mate guarding, what we call in the evolutionary sciences, those all have to be on the table if you open a relationship. And it's not to say monogamous relationships have their own many, many pressure points. And we need to really think about what they are when we move into structures that are new for us.
Yes. I love this idea of pressure points and how all relationships have them. And this idea of reframing ethical or consensual non-monogamy as negotiation non-monogamy. Because it is that. It's just like a constant conversation, lots of check-ins, lots of this felt good, this didn't feel good. And I think that it's interesting to talk about research on this, similar to anything else that you could talk about when it comes to sex and relationships, is people can be private and it can be really challenging also to talk about these things. So I wonder how, as a researcher, you are able to kind of get through to folks and get to the heart of what they're experiencing when there is so much, societal shame and rough edges around discussing different forms of relationship structures. What's that like for you?
Yeah. And I think sometimes researchers and clinicians, I think sometimes have a tendency to, like, we'll hear all the time that, and I've said it too, that monogamous couples can learn a lot from couples that practice consensual non-monogamy or negotiated non-monogamy, except, and I've said this before, except there's a catch there. We're assuming that we're talking about the ones that are doing it in a way that that they have healthy relationships and satisfying relationships. So monogamous couples can learn a lot from those folks that do good communication and are non-monogamous. It doesn't, it's not, they're not these blanket statements. There's plenty of people who are non-monogamous who have really challenging relationships, just like there's plenty of people who are monogamous who have really challenging relationships. It's not, in fact, this brand new study came out, I think 2 weeks ago now, a meta-analysis looking at satisfaction levels, and they're the same in monogamous and non-monogamous. I love that because it also tells us that the noise about one structure is somehow better than the other, or we have to release ourselves from the shackles of society for monogamy, or we have to, just communicate more, or we have all these ideas that one is better than the other. They're not. They're equally high in satisfaction. They're just different structures that humans form for our relationships.
This is so fantastic. This is so cool. I'm so glad that you're here. Okay. We have a few more questions, and then I want to then talk about the male loneliness epidemic. So buckle up. So this season, it's all about pleasure. And oftentimes the pleasure of intimacy with another person or more than one person. I'm wondering, what can people do right now to increase their intimacy with their partner or partners and increase their pleasure? How can people embrace these necessary and fundamental parts of our lives when, as you said, the idea of two people sleeping next to each other, it's very vulnerable. It can be scary. And access to community is very low for many people right now. What can people do?
Yeah, I think one is when we think about what we mean by pleasure, when we look at the biology, psychology, sociology, pleasure, if we have a big tent, which you do so beautifully, when we think about what does pleasure mean, we also derive pleasure from closeness, that we get pleasure from when we all feel love differently. There's a new book out actually on limerence, for instance, that the idea that you're kind of over the top limerence, the argument is only about 50% of people feel it that way, that we feel differently when we're first romantically in love and kind of intoxicated.
Like the honeymoon
in
phase also.
Yeah, that not everyone quite feels that. And so there's a pleasure from that kind of connection, romantic bonding, but there's also a pleasure from deep social connection. When you pick up the phone and talk to your best friend, when you know that if something is wrong, that there are people there to catch you, whether that's your partner or your closest confidants. So I think that if we think of pleasure, not just genital pleasure and sexual pleasure and erotic pleasure, but this closeness. And then what we find in our studies is that closeness makes the sexual and erotic pleasure more satisfying. Better. So we've asked people, for instance, on some of their best sexual events in their lives. I honestly thought it would be a lot of people saying, oh, it wasn't a hookup because I did that thing that I never thought I would do to that I could look my partner in the eyes and do it again. But people were saying that their most satisfying sexual experiences were when they were in love with someone. So that feeling of connection can amplify the erotic. It can amplify pleasure. It can amplify sexual and relationship satisfaction. So I think that sense of closeness and what it does to us physiologically, and when you start to synchronize to someone, when you feel connected to someone, that's just such a powerful force. And we're understanding more and more that it's not a psychic force, or maybe it is, but it's also, there's something deeply behavioral, biological, psychological, sociological about that sense of connection. So I think we cultivate it. There's a few different ways. My big thing is I think we have to stay curious in relationships. The curiosity is the best aphrodisiac. Asking questions, because from curiosity, everything else can stem. We know that in long-term relationships, we look for the expansion of self, doing new things. If you're curious about your partner, and about yourself. And I think there's three things to be curious about. I'm curious about myself in this relationship. I'm curious about you in this relationship. And I'm curious about us. I'm curious about our relationship and what you and I need and want and what we're forming. When we keep asking questions and probing and looking for things and doing things together, that activates the dopamine system. So it's also good. It gives us our feelings of excitement, but also of that novelty that we crave in relationships. But it allows us to experience new dimensions of ourselves and of our partners and of each other together. So I think curiosity is such a powerful tool, but it takes a little work. It takes a reminder, like, have I been curious today? Did I ask you anything? Did I ask you something beyond how was work? How'd you sleep? That's nice to know. I want to know if you slept okay. But really to take it a step further than that and to really be curious about how are you doing? Why do you feel that way? What could we do? What are you dreaming of? We found that all these going back to our pandemic work, we found all these couples. It took being locked up inside a house together. It was the first time they ever asked their partners, "Is there anything you fantasized about that we've never done or we never talked about?" It took being locked up. Now, here's the kicker: everyone thought marriages were going to suffer. Over 80% of marriages did better in the pandemic.
Whoa! So
being curious. Don't wait for a global epidemic to be curious about each other.
Wow. Yeah, that's really something. I'm stuck on so many things that you said. I'm processing everything. I mean, as a joke, I was thinking, did you love the Bad Bunny halftime show or absolutely love the Bad Bunny halftime show? That's a question that you can ask your partner out of curiosity. I also like what you said about calling your best friend. I personally love, and I need to do more reading about research on friendships. I think that it's so necessary to hold your loved ones close and to really invest deeply in your friendships. And that's going to kind of bring us to our last segment called The Buzz, where we are going to talk about the male loneliness epidemic. And also in your book, you talk about the intimacy crisis. And, you know, one of the examples you cite is people turning to AI to replace real partners. And, you know, in the male loneliness epidemic, it's been a very hot topic for the last 2+ years. And supposedly, you know, just to paint a picture for our gorgeous listeners, men are rapidly becoming lonelier due to more time constraints, due to lower wages and high inflation and living costs, less energy for the same reasons. And this is not a great one. I don't like this, but it's, you know, women, quote unquote, abandoning men by choosing to have impossibly high standards or only wanting rich, hot men, which of course we know is not true. But, you know, obviously there's a fear of vulnerability. Men are not going to in-person events as much. They are engaging in self-improvement only in terms of looks, right? And so I'm curious your thoughts on this and just your thoughts on loneliness rising for everyone and the patriarchy hurting everyone. So tell me all your thoughts and feelings about this.
Oh, there's so much to say there. And exactly, you're right? These norms about masculinity in particular, they can harm men, they harm women, they harm relationships. We can get so entrenched in these ideas of where how we're supposed to act, of where power sits. It's really the core of arguments around patriarchy that not everyone always realizes, that they can really, sometimes the damage is very obvious. Like there's questions now about lonely men becoming radicalized, and particularly in online forums. But then they're less obvious about, do we just sort of judge ourselves and we put expectations on ourselves and our partners that are unrealistic? So then we live in a world of never really achieving what we want in our relationships, what we think could somewhere be delivered. So then you spend your time thinking, well, if I had picked that person, or if I go for that other relationship, right? We live in this world of a fantasy of really not how real relationships dynamically play out and have played out for millions of years. So on the question of male loneliness, there's a lot that goes into it. It has to do with how men are socialized and they connect, particularly in the West. And we're talking a lot in the US, but we're seeing these loneliness patterns. They're not restricted to just the US. We're seeing them across North America. We're starting to see them in Europe. We're starting to see them in Asia. Sometimes, as you mentioned, they're related to economies and work. So, for instance, there's been a lot of concern about loneliness and marriage rates and reproductive rates in parts of Asia, like Korea, Japan, China. Korea has one of the lowest fertility rates in the world right now. And part of it, like some researchers have talked in China, that they work a 9-9-6 schedule. You work 9 to 9, 6 days a week. There's not a lot of room for human connection there, right? I know. There's not a lot of room for romance and love, and there's not even a lot of room to reproduce if you wanted to. I mean, the thing we don't talk about is when you're tired, good luck, right? And so, but when we hone in on what's going on with men, the big challenge is, where do they go? Where do they get support? For so many men, and heterosexual men, women are their source of social connection. They're their source of feeling a belonging, and it's to their partnership and to their family. Well, when we delay family formation and we're delaying partnerships, or we've just changed dynamics and relationships to the point that, so then you feel lonely. You have a hard time motivating to go find a romantic partner. So you get in this self-fulfilling cycle. I had a colleague who worked on moms who had postpartum depression, and it was such important work. Problem is, if you're really depressed as a postpartum mom, you're not coming into the lab to do a study. Right. Because you have this, can't get the motivation to, the brain can't get the motivation to socially engage. And I think there's a lot going on. One of the pieces I think that we are better understanding is this low-level threat psychology that everyone's dealing with. I shouldn't say everyone. I think everyone's dealing with it. That we're seeing. We use this. It's called the polyvagal theory in a lot of my work. My colleague Steve Porges has developed it, and written a lot about it. So our vagus nerve, our nervous system, responds to the environment. For so many of us, there's so much stress happening, there's so much anxiety, whether you're watching what's happening in the US with immigration, in Gaza, with the climate, with politics, with global economies. There's just all these different, and it doesn't matter what your political orientation is. You could be on either side of the scorecard on any of those issues. It's stressful. And that adds up to this low-level sense of threat, particularly for men. That's not conducive to social behavior. If your nervous system thinks that you're in a burning building, you're not going to stop for a chat and a connection, right? It's true in the natural world. Two gazelle don't mate in front of a lion. If you are in a threat psychology, that's not good for connection. It's not good for mating. It's not good for love and for sex. So I think what we're seeing more and more is for a lot of men, everything you said, I want to first amplify everything you said. And we're also seeing more and more that what's the expectation of what men are supposed to do? Where do they go for social connections? Not clear. And who do you talk to if you have a challenge with that? Right? There's all this stigma about men going to therapy, about men in social groups. So there's really a challenge for a lot of men of feeling this loneliness, but where do you go to get out of it? How do you climb out of it? Who's curating good information that's not radicalized? Where do you find ways to connect? Something that our species craves to do. How do you find ways to connect? And it's a real challenge. And there aren't great answers. Every government is struggling with this. There's been loneliness ambassadors appointed. But as you hinted at, my concern is that I think in some ways we're talking a lot about psychological loneliness. It's really a question about intimacy. So we have connections, but what are the depth of those connections? Do you feel that you could ask one of your 3,000 Facebook friends if you needed something? Or your 100,000 followers on Twitter? Now, most people don't have that, whatever they are, right? But do you feel that we're connected in remarkable ways, but are they meaningful connections? Where do we go to? Who are our best friends? Who are our partners? Who's our family, our community? Where do we get all of our needs met? And that's
increasing. Who can we
increasingly
laugh with? Who can we be silly with?
Oh, so powerful, so important. Because laughter and being silly is being vulnerable. So where do we feel we can who can we let our shields down with? We need that. We desperately need it as a species.
Dr. Justin Garcia, where have you been all our 13 seasons? This is so fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. Just before we let you go, tell us where we can find your book.
Oh, sure. The Intimate Animal. It's available at any bookstores and online. You can order it. And if you want to follow more about my research and what I'm up to, Dr. Justin Garcia on social media, or follow the Kinsey Institute on social media. We'll post a lot about our studies, about exploring people's romantic and sexual lives.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. This has been incredibly informative. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the Afterglow, where we wind things down, reflect on big takeaways, and leave you with one juicy thing to try, think about, or explore before next week. This conversation with Dr. Garcia was so informative. I felt like I was getting an incredible academic lecture, but also it made me feel so hopeful. Right now, I think it can be easy to look around and see what our lack of community is doing to humanity and to our livelihood, and just feeling like we want to get out of bed every day. We can see the lack of intimacy leading to lower empathy, which hurts all of us. But Dr. Garcia, coming from an evolutionary biologist perspective, reminded me, and hopefully you, that intimacy is what we are scientifically built to do. We have formed our cultures and societies around intimacy, community, and needing each other for millions of years. A decade or so of increased division is not going to undo all of the work that evolution has done leading up to right now. We can trust that. We need each other, and the only way to get the intimacy we need to survive is to be brave and let ourselves be vulnerable with each other. Kind of like when Dr. Garcia was talking about how college students are very vulnerable when they fall asleep next to each other after a hookup. We want to adapt that intimacy and that feeling of vulnerability throughout our other parts of our lives. Now, before we get to the pleasure practice of the week, I wanted to touch a little bit more on the male loneliness epidemic. To be clear, we're not saying men aren't lonely. They definitely are. If you're listening to the show, you know that the patriarchy hurts everyone, and even men. Especially men. Men aren't the only ones who are increasingly lonely, though. Rates of loneliness have been rising for everyone, regardless of gender. While researching this topic, we found some really great articles debunking the idea that men are the only ones getting lonelier. They also debunk men's loneliness being women's fault. If the conversation around male loneliness seems confusingly right-wing, these pieces should help explain what's going on there, and we'll link that in the show notes. And remember, these manosphere creators are grifting and preying on the vulnerable, and the lonely are vulnerable. The male loneliness epidemic is just a targeted grift for these manipulative influencers to sell courses or books or pick up artistry or supplements. So take that as you will. Now, let's get to the pleasure practice of the week and talk about intimacy and adding it to our lives. This week, we are getting super actionable. I want you to think of one close-ish friend or acquaintance, not someone that you talk to every day, not someone who you regularly invite to hangouts. Maybe it's someone from your past, someone who you know and who you trust, who you want to know better or know better again. Ask them to help you make a small decision. What should you cook for dinner tonight? Should you watch one show or another one? Should you get the shirt from the thrift store that you've been wanting? Should you pick up a new sport? It can be something silly, it can be practical, it can be unimportant. Just see how they respond. If they ask you why, tell them that you are interested in their input. Then listen. If you're feeling brave, ask them why they recommend what they recommended. And if you take their advice, tell them. It's little steps like these that add to our intimacy in our everyday lives. Actually having a meaningful conversation with somebody and getting closer improves our intimacy and can make us feel more connected. It can get that oxytocin flowing. We can't wait for someone else to reach out to us. We need to be the people who reach out. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you loved this episode as much as I did. Love y'all. Talk to you next week.